Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. For those that didn't get a chance to watch last week's video, I would highly recommend that you go and check it out. In it, I share how my unconscious biases have played out in my life. Hopefully you can learn a thing or two from my experiences. The last few weeks in South Africa have been quite insane. There has been lots happening that I have some really strong views on. The first thing is all the heavy rains we've been experiencing in KwaZulu-Natal, one of the provinces within South Africa. The rains have been so crazy that it's resulted in some wide-scale flooding, and it's left many people dead, many people missing, and lots of people displaced. If you're feeling like you'd like to help, I would recommend that you check out The Gift of the Givers, and I'll pop their details in the description box below to see how you can assist with the relief efforts, because they are playing quite a big part in helping out there. In today's video though, I would like to talk about another crisis that's been plaguing South Africa what feels like millennia: the energy crisis. If you're not from South Africa, you're in for a treat, because I'm going to be sharing what's been going on with regards to our electricity, power, stuff. It's wild. I thought I'd give my opinion on how South Africa can be the biggest producer of energy for Africa, and yet it leaves its own citizens with breaks in power every single day. How? Do you know that Eskom, South Africa's power utility, is the only service provider that tells you to not use their service while still insisting that you pay the bills? Does it make sense to you? It does not make sense to me. That's why we're here. For those that are new here, I'm Natasha from Brightsprout Consulting, and I'm a career and life coach. My goal here on YouTube and in real life is to help you succeed in life. Normally, I do this by sharing my top tips for how to make sense of the murky world of work, but sometimes I also share what I like to call my opinionated opinions about things happening in the world. Hopefully, by sharing my opinions, we can start a conversation and it can broaden what you know, what you learn. Who knows? That sounds like something you're interested in, then please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you can be updated of any new content that I post. So, I fundamentally believe that to know where you're going, you need to examine where you've come from. That being said, I realized I knew nothing about Eskom. I knew nothing about how we got electricity in South Africa. And I thought that if I wanted to share my perspective on how things have gone so terribly wrong, that maybe I should go and investigate what's happened before. So, join me on a journey as I talk about the history of Eskom, so we can together uncover how it could have ended up so badly, so very badly. Let me just say up front that this is going to be a long video, and you'll soon realize why. Eskom, there's lots to unpack there. There's lots that I didn't know that I feel you could benefit from knowing about as well. So this video is going to be long, and I'm probably going to have to do another video just so that we can get through all of the stuffs. Hope that's okay. Join me for the ride. So let's get into it. I was incredibly surprised to discover that Eskom, South Africa's power utility, was founded out of a parliamentary act, the Electricity Act of 1922. Essentially, Eskom has been around since the 1920s in some way or form. Weird. You'd think they would have gotten things right by now. Prior to that, the provision of electricity was at the discretion of the municipalities that you lived in. They decided it was a good idea, they would get in a private company who would charge you an arm and a leg for electricity. Needless to say, the cost of electricity varied depending on where you lived and whether the municipality thought it was important for you to have it. The Electricity Act of 1922 was a way for government to ensure that all citizens have access to electricity at cost, without a markup. Great.
Very well, gentlemen. We are about to brave the storm in a skiff made of paper. And how it shall end, God only knows.
From the moment the act was signed into legislation, the head honchos of the newly established parastatal started building what we now know as Eskom. And in support of their ambitions of giving everybody in the country opportunity to get electricity at an affordable cost, they started building some of the power stations we now know and use within South Africa. This expansion came at a cost, and someone had to foot the bill. Initially, Eskom went out and got, I'll get this right, debenture loans? Those loans to support this growth. And they were essentially medium to long-term loans with a fixed rate. Great. Unlike our bonds right now. But later, the lucky fishes were issued with state guaranteed loans. I still don't know what that actually means. I can only assume that that meant that the state stood as surety for the loans that they got from banks. So it stands to reason that because the government now owned this parastatal, that meant that they would have to foot the bill.
This is going to cost you.
Put it on my tab.
What was that?
Put it on my tab.
For years, it was all good. Lots of people got access to electricity that would never have had it without Eskom. And it was great for the economy. I'm not sure if many of you outside of South Africa know this, but South Africa is a mineral-rich country. We've got stuff like gold and diamonds, and that requires a stable source of power to mine. So it did wonders for our economy. The bulk of the electricity that is produced by Eskom is done so by coal. Even today, up to 90% of how we produce energy in South Africa is done by coal. Wild. Needless to say, with all the challenges around saving our planet and stuff like that, coal is not seen as a good way to be producing electricity. So in the 1970s, Eskom was told to start investigating and implementing some kind of nuclear power. That's when they decided to build Eskom nuclear power plant, which is in Cape Town. And the thinking behind that is that Koeberg Power Station would be producing electricity for the Cape Town area and would also facilitate the process of South Africa's nuclear program. Because, you know, everyone was playing in the nuclear space. Why not us as well? All sounds good so far, right? We're doing well for ourselves. But then, in 1981, Eskom was hit with one of many financial scandals. At the time, the assistant financial, got it? The assistant chief accountant was found to have embezzled 8 million rand from Eskom.
$1 million.
Know what you're thinking. 8 million these days, drop in the bucket. But you know, back then, 8 million was a lot of money. In fact, if I equate it back to what we would know today, it would probably come to 200 million rand.
$100 billion.
How is one person able to steal so much money so quickly? Crazy. Anywho, I digress. Despite being short 8 million rand from their coffers, the management at Eskom were still quite passionate about achieving those big, hairy, audacious goals they had set for themselves. So in the 1970s, they went and they pitched their idea to raise electrical tariffs. Yeah, it went down like a lead balloon. In fact, the government decided to instead offer other solutions to them. They put together a commission of like a whole lot of people, and they then, you know, gave some recommendations for how they can either cost save or, you know, make some money. This led to Eskom abandoning its lofty goals of being a non-profit. And they went out and they got all these international loans to support the growth that they believed Eskom could grow to. And later, they even restructured the organization to reduce the headcount from 66,000 employees to 60,000 employees. As you can see, the focus of many of the Eskom executives and government officials at the time was around how to elevate South Africa in the international arena. That all changed after the 1994 democratic elections.
Of houses, the introduction of electricity.
After those elections, the decision was taken by the government to return back to basics, because what's the point of having a nuclear program with nuclear energy when you can't even provide electricity to all the citizens of your country? Makes sense, right? And it made sense because there were so many people living in South Africa at the time that were doing so without lights. Can you imagine? And that's only a few years ago. In 1998, there was a change to the Electricity Act of 1922. About time. But it was in the form of another act called the Eskom Amendment Act. I know, we need to work on what we name things. What this act gave government officials, though, was the opportunity to influence policy and the direction of investments within the parastatal. Methinks this may have been the start of a problem, knowing what we know now. But putting so many new households onto the electrical grid proved to be difficult. Because it was a lot more expensive than everyone had anticipated, because we didn't necessarily have the infrastructure to support that. Also, the difficulty is your wealthier clients could potentially pay for your electricity usage, but what about those that were living on the breadline? So what essentially happened was people weren't paying their bills, and Eskom couldn't just cut them off. So Eskom was absorbing all of those costs. It was during this period that the then president, Thabo Mbeki, suggested that we privatize a few of the parastatals, Eskom included. This idea went down like a lead balloon within Parliament. The two main parties, were fighting about this whole thing. So any request that Eskom put on the table for additional budget for infrastructure was just denied. Knowing that Eskom potentially couldn't afford to continue the expansion of electricity into all the households in South Africa, a decision was taken by the capitalists out there to start selling our electricity to other countries. This is how Eskom Enterprises was born. Its focus was on providing electricity and stuff like that to some other countries, and here's a list of all of those countries. As you can see, lots of African countries, China's in there. Also, this was an opportunity for Eskom Enterprises to provide services that are not regulated by the Eskom Act to South Africans. I'm really not sure what services they would be providing, but it's what they did. I'm not sure how jacked up you are in terms of South African history, but up until the 94 democratic elections, we were still living under the apartheid regime. And needless to say, there were many oppressed people living in South Africa. So when the ANC government came into power, there was big expectation that they would drive social change. And they did. They had to put their money where their mouth is. So the bulk of the budget was focused on doing just that. The net result, though, was that there wasn't any money left to support the expansion in Eskom. You'd think then that they'd realized that they couldn't support their big plans of getting electricity into every household, because the system physically couldn't support that plan any longer, and they weren't pumping the necessary money into infrastructure to support it. You'd think they'd slow down a bit, but they didn't. They pushed through, and you know, something had to give, which it did. Enter 2007 rolling blackouts. This story is far from over. I mean, I haven't even gotten to the juicy bits about the Guptas yet. Join me next week. I'll be continuing this conversation and telling you more about what's happened at Eskom and why I think we should all just be living off the grid. If you like this video, then give it a thumbs up and comment and share. It really does help to grow my channel and it gets it seen by more people. As mentioned earlier, I'm a career and life coach. If you want to build your confidence and you're just looking for someone to walk that path with you, then please feel free to reach out. All of my details will be in the description box below.